A girl with no training enters her dog in a professional rescue trial. A dog that was once left for dead. A boy who hadn't spoken in years follows silently behind. Sounds like a story destined to fail. But in just 3 trials, search, control, and obedience, everything changes. And when the man who abandoned that dog tries to buy him back in front of hundreds of people, the quietest boy in the crowd says one sentence that no one will ever forget. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The early morning frost clung to the pine needles and wooden fence posts along the edge of Carteridge Canine Estate, nestled on the outskirts of Colorado Springs. The chill in the air was sharp, the kind that stung the lungs and turned one's breath into ghostly mist. Snow still covered much of the surrounding forest. Though winter's end was on the horizon, the estate sat at the base of the Cheyenne mountain range, where winds howled with indifference and only the hardiest creatures thrived. The estate was famous across the state, a sprawling, impeccably maintained facility known for breeding world-class German shepherds for military and police work. Its owner, Carter Huxley, was equally well known, if not feared, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 60s. Huxley had a face carved by decades of harsh decision-making. His silver hair was always slicked back, his jaw perpetually clenched in judgment, and his sharp blue eyes missed nothing, dressed every day in a pressed charcoal trench coat. He walked the estate grounds like a king among peasants. To Carter, animals weren't companions, they were assets, tools, and weak tools had no place in his world. Years ago, Huxley had made a name for himself after winning the North American Canine Tactical Trials 3 years in a row. His reputation as a no-nonsense perfectionist was born out of those early triumphs, and hardened by a personal tragedy, the loss of his younger brother, Dale, in a military operation that went wrong due to an untrained dog's hesitation. From that moment, Carter adopted a philosophy as cold as the mountains he lived beneath. Only the strongest should serve, and anything less deserved nothing. That philosophy echoed through the estate that morning as a low, excited murmur passed through the handlers and trainers. Silver Vixen, Carter's prized female, had given birth during the night, paired with Titan, the most decorated stud in the breeding program. The litter had been eagerly anticipated for months. The puppies were expected to be nothing short of exceptional, perfect genetic specimens destined for greatness. In the main kennel's birthing suite, under red heat lamps and lined with cedar shavings, the litter of 5 was nestled tightly against their mother's belly. 4 pups squirmed healthily, already vocal and active, but the 5th, smaller, thinner, and trembling, struggled even to lift its head. Harold, one of the estate's senior handlers, knelt beside the mother, a wiry man in his 40s with a weathered face and a permanent stoop in his posture. Harold had worked with dogs longer than most people had stayed married. He raised an eyebrow as he watched the runt's feeble movements. "Something wrong," came Carter's voice like a blade of wind behind him. Harold stood immediately. "No, sir, just one of them's a little weak." Carter stepped forward, his boots echoing against the concrete. He stared down at the litter, then narrowed his gaze on the tiny pup that struggled to move. "This one," he asked flatly, gesturing with a gloved hand. "Yes, sir. Might just need time." Carter scoffed. "Time is for people who have time. I don't breed weakness. He's not sick," Harold said carefully. "He just needs a little extra care." Carter turned his head slowly, fixing Harold with an icy stare. "You know the rule. We do not invest in mediocrity." Harold opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. He simply nodded. "Remove it." Carter said, "No records, no name, but—" "Do I need to remind you what happens when we compromise?" Carter's voice was low and dangerous. "One weak pup can set back training by months. We breed champions." "Harold, not excuses." Without waiting for a reply, Carter spun on his heel and exited the room. Harold looked back at the pup. The tiny creature had managed to roll halfway onto its belly, one paw stretched forward, as if reaching for something beyond its grasp. Its fur was darker than the others, a deep sable with a faint silver streak along the spine, and its ears were slightly folded, as newborns often were. Its breathing was labored, but steady. Harold sighed. "Damn it," he muttered later that evening. As the sky turned purple and snow began to fall again, Harold took the pup, wrapped gently in an old towel, and drove beyond the estate's borders, past the gates, past the fencing, and down a winding road that led into the edge of the Pike National Forest. He parked beside an old maintenance trail, now mostly overgrown. Setting the bundle down beside a pine stump, he hesitated. "I'm sorry, little guy," he whispered. "You don't deserve this." The pup shivered violently as wind whipped through the trees, then slowly. It let out a soft whimper, barely a sound, but it was a protest. However feeble, a refusal to be silent. Harold closed his eyes, sighed again, and turned back to the truck. As he drove away, the falling snow began to cover the towel, and beneath it, the tiny creature still breathed. The morning sun bled through the pines in slanted beams of gold, piercing the forest's early mist as if trying to reach every shadow. The snow had mostly melted near the edge of the woods, where the tall trees opened into a gentle clearing that sloped down toward a shallow stream. The air still held a chill, but spring was stirring. Birds called from high branches, and the silence of winter had begun to break apart. Ellie Mae Hartwell trudged down the dirt path that led from her small log cabin to the tree line, carrying a basket of scraps and garden trimmings she intended to compost. She was 27, tall and broad-shouldered from years of working her family's land. Her dark auburn hair was tied in a messy braid, and she wore a faded blue flannel shirt tucked into worn jeans. Her hands were calloused, her nails short, her face freckled from sun and wind, and her boots bore the stubborn mud of the forest trails. People in town often called her distant. Some said she was the girl who forgot how to smile. But few knew that Ellie had once dreamed of studying veterinary medicine until a car accident took her parents and forced her to raise her younger brother Jesse alone. That loss reshaped her, carved caution into her speech, grief into her bones, and resilience into her spine. Their cabin sat on the outskirts of Colorado Springs, near the boundary of Pike National Forest. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a tin roof that rattled in storms, and a wood stove that had to be fed every few hours in winter. But it was safe, and it was theirs. As she stepped over a patch of muddy earth, a strange sound drifted through the stillness, a whimper, soft, high-pitched. Not bird, not wind. She froze. The sound came again, closer to the creek, setting the basket down. She moved toward the noise, careful not to snap twigs beneath her boots. That's when she saw him, half covered in a wet towel and dusted with pine needles. The small German shepherd pup lay curled in the snow beside the stream. His body trembled uncontrollably, and his breaths were shallow. His fur was dirty, matted in places, but even through the grime, Ellie could see the sable and silver hue running along his back. His eyes, barely open, locked on hers. "Oh, God, she whispered, kneeling beside him. The pup flinched at first, trying weakly to crawl away, but his legs gave out after 2 clumsy movements. Ellie removed her jacket and gently wrapped it around his tiny frame. His body radiated heat, but the kind of heat that came from fever, not strength. "You poor thing," she murmured. "How long have you been out here?" She held him close, listening to his heartbeat flutter like a trapped bird's wings. As she stood, she turned to head back up the trail, but froze at the sound of a voice. "What's that you've got?" Ellie came a sharp tone, turning. She found herself facing Marla Kinney, a neighbor from down the road. Marla was in her mid-50s, sharp-nosed, always dressed like she expected to be seen, even in the woods. Her red parka was spotless, her jeans crisp. Marla had lived in the area for decades and took pride in being the unofficial voice of what's proper. "It's a pup," Ellie replied, voice cool. "He was left out here." Marla stepped forward, peering at the bundle in Ellie's arms with distaste. "That thing looks half dead, probably diseased. You can't just bring strays home, you know." Ellie said nothing. Her jaw clenched. "You've got Jessie to think about," Marla added, more softly now. "And a dog like that, well, some of them are born wrong." Ellie didn't answer. She simply turned and walked away, her boots crunching the thawing path behind her. Marla's disapproving huff faded into the trees, back at the cabin. Jesse was sitting on the porch, knees drawn to his chest, a book clutched tightly in his hands. He was 13, slender, with tousled, sandy hair and pale skin that bruised easily. His gray eyes were fixed on the tree line. Jesse had been diagnosed with selective mutism at age 5, following the accident. Since then, he rarely spoke and rarely made eye contact, except with Ellie, and even then, only on his terms. He watched silently as Ellie approached, the moment he saw the bundle. He stood, book forgotten. "This little guy needs help," Ellie said gently as she passed him. Jesse followed her inside without a word. The rest of the day passed in quiet urgency. Ellie warmed goat milk in a pan, mixed in a pinch of honey, and used a dropper to coax the liquid into the pup's mouth. She cleaned his fur, cut away matted patches, and wrapped him in a soft towel by the fireplace. The dog didn't move much, but his breathing steadied. Jesse sat nearby, saying nothing, but watching everything. At one point, as Ellie adjusted the pup's blanket, Jesse reached out slowly, cautiously. His fingers brushed the pup's head. The dog twitched, then stilled. Jesse didn't pull away that evening. While Ellie prepared stew, Jesse returned to the rug, lying flat on his stomach beside the pup. His lips moved, barely. A sound, almost a whisper, escaped. "Max." Ellie looked up from the kitchen. "What did you say?" Jesse didn't answer, but his hand rested gently on the pup's paw. She smiled quietly to herself. "Max," she repeated, nodding. "Yeah, that sounds right." Spring had quietly wrapped its arms around the edge of the forest near Colorado Springs. Morning frost was now a memory, replaced by damp earth and the fresh scent of blooming pine. The cabin, modest and worn, stood like a guardian of peace at the tree line, its wooden siding darkened by time, its roof patched by Ellie's own hands. Inside, a quiet rhythm had taken root, one of patience, slow recovery, and small, invisible victories. Max had grown stronger, though he was still cautious. His legs no longer wobbled when he walked. His sable coat was beginning to shine, and he had filled out enough to look less like a rescue and more like a young pup on the edge of adolescence. Yet his eyes, deep, amber, alert, still held the same hesitant watchfulness as the day Ellie found him by the stream. Ellie Mae Hartwell was as patient as the woods themselves. Every morning, after splitting firewood and preparing breakfast for Jessie, she would take Max outside. She wore the same pair of faded jeans, and her boots carried the scars of many trails. Her instructions were soft, clear, and consistent. She trained Max with her hands, her voice, her stillness. There were no harsh commands, only quiet insistence. "Sit," she would say gently, tapping her fingers against her thigh. Max would tilt his head, study her, then attempt to obey. Some days, he succeeded. Other days, he simply sat there, ears flicking in the breeze, unsure, but he never stopped trying. Ellie never lost patience, and that alone made all the difference. Meanwhile, Jessie was changing too, each afternoon, when Ellie returned from her shifts at the general store in town. She would find Jessie and Max together, either sitting near the stream behind the cabin or curled up in the patch of soft grass beneath the old sugar maple. Jessie never said much, but Ellie noticed how his posture had shifted, less guarded, more open. He no longer flinched when Max barked. He reached out now, stroked Max's head, even leaned on him as if Max were a pillow that breathed and listened. One late afternoon, Ellie had just finished stacking firewood when she heard the unmistakable sound of Jessie's voice. It wasn't loud, not more than a whisper carried on wind, but it was a voice. "Good boy." She paused, unsure if her ears had played tricks on her. She walked quietly to the porch, where Jessie sat cross-legged beside Max. The boy's hand rested gently on the dog's neck, and he leaned forward to whisper again, "Stay, Max, stay." Ellie felt her chest tighten, her heart bloom and ache at once. It was the first time in months, no, years, that Jessie had strung together words without prompting. She didn't dare interrupt. She just watched, letting the moment root itself deeply in her soul. Max wasn't just healing. He was healing them. But even peace has a way of sending ripples into the wider world. In town, a few whispers had begun to surface, quiet remarks traded over counters and fences. "You know, Ellie Hartwell's got a German shepherd now," someone would say, "real sharp one. Follows her around like a soldier. Quiet, but focused." The story traveled like smoke, curling its way into unexpected places. It eventually reached the ears of a man who had tried to erase Max's existence. Carter Huxley was standing by the training ring of his estate when his assistant, a lean man in his 30s named Brandon Keller, approached. Brandon wore pressed khakis and a polo embroidered with the Carteridge logo. He held a clipboard in one hand, his expression carefully neutral. "Sir," he said, "you might want to hear this." Huxley didn't turn. "Speak. There's word from town. A young woman on the edge of the forest, Ellie Hartwell. She's been seen with a German shepherd pup, about 4 months old. Sable, one ear's a little crooked, at that." Huxley did turn, slowly, his eyes narrowed. "Repeat that." Brandon cleared his throat. "They say he's trained, well, sort of, learns fast. Some say he's always by her side. Locals are starting to talk." Huxley's lips tightened into a thin line. That pup was supposed to be gone. Brandon said nothing. I gave a clear order, still. Silence. Huxley's jaw clenched. "Find out everything you can about her. Quietly. I want to know how she got him, and why the hell he's still breathing." He turned his back and walked toward the stables, his shoulders rigid with fury, beneath his polished exterior. The foundations of control were beginning to crack. He had discarded Max like a defective product, and now, that same dog was becoming something remarkable without him, and that, to Carter Huxley, was unacceptable. The sun had barely broken the horizon when Ellie tightened the strap on Max's harness. A light morning mist hung low over the hills outside Silvervale, a small mountain town an hour's drive from Colorado Springs. It was the day of the annual mountain rescue trials, an event known mostly among search and rescue circles, but occasionally attracting curious onlookers. Set on the rugged, pine-draped slopes of the Rockies, the trials tested the agility, obedience, and instinct of working dogs under simulated rescue scenarios, avalanches, missing hikers, river crossings. Ellie stood beside Max at the edge of the gathering field, her face calm but taut with focus. She wore a navy windbreaker and cargo pants, her auburn hair tucked under a wool beanie. Max sat obediently beside her, now nearly 6 months old, lean and long-legged. His coat a sleek wave of sable and silver. His once crooked ear now stood nearly straight, though it still tilted when he was uncertain, a remnant of his earliest vulnerability. Participants milled about, adjusting harnesses, checking tags, and warming up. Most were professionals, firefighters, park rangers, former military handlers. Ellie didn't know a single face, yet eyes were already on her. A woman with a boy and a rescue dog that hadn't come from any official channel that stood out. From behind a folding table marked Registration, a woman waved them over. Her name tag read, Janet Moore, Event Coordinator. Janet was in her late 50s, with crow's feet set deep from years of working outdoors. She wore a red parka and a walkie-talkie clipped to her belt. Her voice was friendly, but she eyed Max with curiosity. "You here to register for the rescue trials?" Han Janet asked, scanning her clipboard. "Yes," Ellie replied. "Ellie Hartwell. This is Max." Janet scribbled on her sheet, then leaned down, inspecting the dog. "Not a big fella. Looks green. He's never competed," Ellie admitted, "but he's capable." Janet smiled with polite skepticism. "Well, the field's tough this year, but we've seen surprises before." They were given number 27 and directed to the staging zone as they walked away. Ellie spotted a familiar figure stepping out from a black SUV parked behind the spectator area. Carter Huxley. He was dressed impeccably. As always, black trench coat, polished leather gloves, hair slicked back with mechanical precision. But his eyes betrayed him. The moment he saw Max, his expression stiffened. His jaw flexed beneath tight lips, and a storm gathered silently in his gaze. Ellie felt her stomach drop but didn't flinch. Max, sensing her shift in energy, leaned into her leg. "What is he doing here?" Jessie asked softly beside her. He had grown more expressive these past weeks, but still preferred quiet sentences. Dressed in a fleece hoodie and hiking boots, Jessie held a notepad he used for sketching dog movements during training. Ellie didn't answer. She just bent down and whispered to Max, "He's just a shadow. You're the one with the light." The event began shortly after 9 a.m. The trials were divided into 3 main stages: search, recovery, and control. Each team had 15 minutes per stage to demonstrate their dog's response to voice and signal commands in unpredictable, rugged terrain. Failure to complete a section disqualified the team from moving forward. When Ellie and Max's number was called, whispers followed them to the front. The announcer, a former SAR team lead named Tom Delgado, offered a brief introduction into the mic. Next up, entry Sumner 27. Max, handled by Ellie Hartwell from Colorado Springs, first-time participants. A few in the crowd chuckled under their breath. One handler from a military K-9 unit, a tall man with square shoulders and a neatly trimmed beard, leaned toward his teammate and muttered, "That dog's ears are too soft for mountain work." Ellie didn't hear it. She didn't need to. The first challenge was a simulated avalanche scenario. 2 volunteers had been buried under light debris behind a ridge. The dog was to search the perimeter and alert once it found human scent. "Ready?" the judge asked. Ellie gave a single nod. Then she looked at Max and said, low and firm, "Find." Max's ears flicked forward. He sniffed the wind, circled twice, then bolted toward the ridge faster than she'd ever seen him run. He moved with focus, nose to the ground, zigzagging across the flagged area. Within 90 seconds, he halted, barked once, then began pawing. The judge raised his hand. First at find. Moments later, Max located the second spot, 2 for 2, time remaining. 7 minutes. The next challenge was the river cross, a test of trust and obedience. The dog had to cross a narrow plank over a stream, then respond to recall under distraction. Many faltered. Max paused at the edge of the plank, ears twitching at the water's rush below. "Come on, Max," Ellie urged. "You've got this." From behind, Jesse whispered something Ellie didn't catch, but Max turned his head slightly, took a breath, and crossed. The final challenge was control under pressure. A mannequin was placed at the base of a hill, injured. The handler had to send the dog down and command it to lie beside the body without touching or panicking. Ellie gave the cue. Max charged down, skidding to a halt beside the form. He sat, then, almost as if he understood the weight of the test, lowered his body beside it, head resting gently near the plastic hand. The judges conferred. Whispers turned to applause. Ellie blinked. Stunned, she turned toward Jesse, who was beaming, an unspoken glow in his eyes that needed no words. Behind them, Carter Huxley stood, arms folded. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of disbelief and something else, an emotion he had long buried. Recognition. That dog was his. The late afternoon sun stretched golden fingers over the hills of Silvervale, casting long shadows across the competition grounds. The final scores had been tallied, and anticipation buzzed through the crowd like static. Spectators filled the wooden bleachers, their breath rising in soft clouds beneath the brisk mountain air. Judges stood near the podium, their clipboards now tucked away, and handlers gathered with their dogs nearby, some pacing, some sitting in hushed excitement. Max lay calmly at Ellie's feet, his chest rising steadily. His sable coat glowed in the fading light, and his eyes, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now gleamed with quiet confidence. Ellie rested a hand on his back, fingers sinking into the thick fur. Beside her stood Jesse, a notebook still clutched in his hand, his knuckles white around the edges. His lips were pressed together in a thin line, but his eyes were alive, on the far side of the field. Carter Huxley approached. His stride was precise, his long coat flapping gently in the breeze. He stopped 3 feet from Ellie and folded his gloved hands in front of him. The quiet murmur of the crowd dulled as people noticed the confrontation. Huxley's voice was even, but low. "That dog, he's from my estate. One of the Titan Vixen litter. I know my bloodlines." Ellie didn't move. "He has a name. His name is Max. I'm not here to fight," Huxley said, his eyes scanning Max as though assessing a product. "I'm here to make a proposition. I'll buy him back. Name your price." Jesse looked up, startled. Ellie stared for a long moment before answering. "You want to buy back what you threw away?" Huxley's mouth twitched. "I made a judgment based on early indicators. I was wrong. That's business, but I'm willing to make it right. 10,000. Ellie shook her head. 20, he said. Still silence. 50. The air thickened. A few nearby handlers turned to listen, some with wide eyes. Ellie stood up slowly, eyes fixed on Huxley. You didn't just abandon him. You judged him in his weakest moment and gave him no chance. You left him to die. You can't buy your way back from that. A pause. Huxley looked as if he'd bite back a retort, but before he could, a small voice cut the air like a clear note in a storm. Max is my hero. The crowd froze. Ellie turned sharply. Jesse stood tall now, the notebook at his side. His voice had carried, unwavering, sincere. A beat passed, then another. Then came the sound, a slow, rising wave of applause. One person, then three, then dozens. The bleachers erupted with cheers. Even some of the handlers joined in. Janet Moore, the event coordinator, placed a hand over her heart. Max raised his head and looked up at Jesse, his tail sweeping once across the grass. Huxley's face tightened. He turned without another word and walked away. His footsteps lost in the sea of applause as the noise faded. Tom Delgado stepped up to the microphone at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, the winner of this year's Mountain Rescue Trials for outstanding performance, control, and spirit, Max, handled by Ellie Hartwell. Cheers burst again. Ellie knelt to wrap her arms around Max, who barked once, short and proud. Jesse reached down, brushing Max's shoulder for the first time. They stood as one, a team forged not from pedigree, but from something stronger, love. After the ceremony, several people approached. A woman in a ranger's uniform, tall and broad-shouldered, introduced herself as Captain Denise Carraway, head of a mountain rescue unit in northern Colorado. She had dark brown skin, short twists tucked into a regulation bun, and a no-nonsense tone that still carried warmth. We could use a dog like Max, she said. If you ever consider SAR work professionally, come find me. Ellie smiled. Maybe someday, as the crowd dispersed. Janet Moore caught up to them. That was the most remarkable thing I've seen in years, she said. Her voice soft with admiration. Not just the dog, but everything. She looked at Jesse and offered a gentle nod. You're braver than most grown men I've met. Jesse gave a shy half-smile. Thanks. Later that evening, as the last cars pulled away from the lot, Ellie, Jesse, and Max remained near the edge of the field. They sat on the tailgate of the old pickup Ellie had borrowed from a neighbor. Max lay between them, head in Jesse's lap. The sky above was a canvas of pink and indigo. Stars peeked out one by one. Do you think he knows what just happened? Jesse asked. Ellie looked at Max, who was now watching the horizon with the stillness of a sentinel. I think he knows he matters, she said, and I think he always did. We just needed to believe in him before he could believe in himself. Jesse nodded. Like me, Ellie turned to him. Heart full. Exactly like you. The mountain air grew colder, but none of them moved. They didn't need to. In that quiet clearing beneath the stars, surrounded by the echoes of applause and the warmth of what could never be bought. Max, once discarded, now celebrated, rested not just as a champion, but as a living symbol of what love, patience, and second chances can do, sometimes. The greatest miracles don't arrive in flashes of lightning or grand gestures. They come quietly, in the form of a trembling pup abandoned in the cold, or a child who whispers their first brave words when the world least expects it. Max was never meant to survive, yet by grace, by love, and perhaps by something far greater than any of us can see. He did more than survive. He became a beacon of hope, just like Jesse, just like Ellie. We are all broken in some way, but through patience, compassion, and faith, we can rise, we can heal, we can help others do the same. This story reminds us that God often chooses the forgotten, the overlooked, the cast away, to perform His quiet wonders. That no life is too small, no soul too lost, to be redeemed and called for a purpose. If Max's journey touched your heart, if you believe in second chances, in the silent strength of love, and in the divine hand that guides it all, then don't keep that to yourself. Leave a comment below with Amen if you believe that even the weakest can become the strongest with love. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that miracles are still real. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that honor faith, hope, and the beauty of the human-animal bond. And may God bless you and your loved ones with courage, kindness, and the wisdom to see the value in every living soul. We may not always see His plan, but we can always choose to believe. Amen.